I'd thought about putting some effort into a channel with some content, video or otherwise. Thought about topics. Tend to like a lot of things. Pens is up there. I have a lot of pens. I know a lot about pens. I have a lot to say about pens. People ask for my advice about pens, and I think I can help people with pens. Functional pens, not jewelry pens, not collectible pens necessarily. That's why we start here. The Bic Cristal. This is the one that started it all. It wasn't called Cristal back when it came out. It wasn't 1.6 millimeters, but this is one of the most important pens. As some have said, maybe one of the best pens ever. And here is my first pen video. The pen that started it all. Before this thing was called the Cristal, it had a bunch of different names, but at one point it was called the Biro. Who invented it? Laszlo Biro. See any commonality here? People talk about Kleenex, but the Kleenex wasn't invented by John Kleenex. Just think about that. This guy invented a category. Well, one other person had a reasonable commercial splash with something similar, but he's the guy that hit it big, that patented this sort of design, ballpoint pen with ink that is semi-solid in the barrel and then more or less liquefies when you write with it. Back in 1938. We're going to keep it really simple. Tiny bit of history. 100 billion of these pens have been sold. Now, if you envision the Earth and drawing a line around and around the Earth many, many, many times, the problem is with 100 billion, the line length that this pen could create, it's not just number of times around the Earth. So if you take and go off out the atmosphere of the U.S., further than rockets can fly, further than Earth itself is gravitational pull, all the way 1 kabillion miles away to the planet Rigel 7. That is how long 100 billion pens could write if you laid them end to end. Quite a bit. Let's get into what this matters to you. What is this pen for? Well, these are really good for versatility, good on lots of different kinds of paper. I love a lot of fussy pens that don't write well on paper that's rough or paper that's thin. So you really get a lot of versatility. Types of writing. What do you write for? That's one of the things I notice in pen reviews is people don't necessarily consider, am I writing to take notes? Am I writing for creativity? Am I writing for art? What's the purpose of the writing? And this is really good for lots of types of writing. I remember when I was attempting a design education and making a point of buying a lot of very fancy implements to write and draw with, I found some very accomplished designers who had incredible talent and who had developed those talents to a fine edge, who did a lot of their work with a simple ballpoint pen like this one. And then the third one is weather. If you live in a place that's cold, there are certain kinds of ink that just don't flow well, and certain kinds of nibs and tips that just don't work well in cold weather. This one works well in all kinds of weather. So also we've got economy, we've got ubiquity. These are so easy to find. And then flow, the nature of that ink. What you might think of as a semi-liquid ink really lends itself to just go and go and go and write and have it flow from your pen. That also leads us in to some of the drawbacks of this. Not so good are the blobs. See that? See that? See that? Wait a minute, there's a trend happening here. Because the ink on the ball essentially flows through a tube and gets deposited from the tube onto the ball, and then the ball rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls, on the other side, a little blob tends to accumulate. So when you write and stop, occasionally there's a blob that forms like this, not every time. That blob can be an issue, and that also means that sometimes when you go to start, when you start your line, Some of these, in this particular model, especially the 1.6, the bolder one is less prone to it, but the finer ones, sometimes they start a little light. So that's an issue. And then the last piece is jotting, meaning if you're writing, if you're making a line that goes and goes, fine. But are you doing something that doesn't? And see, I wasn't even trying to do that. I made this motion. But what if I just wanted to make a little tick mark or a dot? To make a dot without any motion, not necessarily so good because this ball action's not occurring. Boy, what a mess this page is, but I think that's the kind of thing you hope to look back 1,000 videos from now and say, boy, you've come a long way. Let's take a look at a sample of the writing. So here's just a few different moves made. I know I did some writing a minute ago. Pretty good. Notice that blobbing causing issues here. Notice some build-up on the top of these loops. Notice some issues with starting and stopping. If you get going, though, once you get going, it's got a smooth feel if you're ready to look past those blobs. Pretty good if you're laying down a level of color. And then one thing to try is to get gradations from a finer or lighter to a heavier patch. And not too bad on that, although you really have to have a delicate touch. Pricing is all over the place. I've seen these things on clearance for just a few cents, up to maybe $1 a piece if you buy it at a convenience store. But around 15 cents is kind of the midpoint of looking for a good deal on this sort of pen. What a deal. This is not a bad pen to have. This is one of those ones that just because it's common, just because it's everyday, does not mean that it does not serve its purpose. You don't really need to have a special or a fancy pen to have a good pen, and this is a great example of it. So now the question is, what pen would you like to see me cover in my next video? Thanks a lot.